So once there was a castle, a great big castle with gargoyles on the turrets, and a moat around it, and a great garden out the back. And at the end of the garden there was a wall, not such a high wall, a cobbled wall, and beyond the wall was a great forest, a wild forest, the forest of Mendel. And in the castle there lived a little girl, and the castle would be known by her father and her father's father and her father's 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 father, right back to the beginning of time. And the little girl, well, as with lots of little girls, was a little scared of the dark. And each night she would lay in her bed, and she would go to bed in the twilight hour before dark really fell, and she would wait for the soft cooing of the twilight owls, and they would twit and twoo her over the border into sleep's far realms. There was one night when, well, everything changed for the little girl. For she was lying in her bed there, waiting as always for the twit-twoo of the twilight owls. But nothing came. And she waited and she waited, and darkness was coming in, and there was still no twit-twoo, and she grew more and more afraid, and the fear was taking her further and further away from sleep's realms and sleep's borders. And darkness was coming in, and she grew scared, for the dark was not a place to which she had really ever ventured, a place that she really knew at all. But as she lay there and she waited for the calling of the owls, she heard something else out in the forest. She heard a caw, ah, rather than a soft, nice, gentle coo. And this caw was a cry of pain. And the little girl was moved, for she cared greatly for the creatures of the world. And though it was dark outside, you know, love does strange things to us sometimes. And she tossed and she turned, thinking about that poor bird out there. And then she heard the caw, the calling of the bird again, and she knew she had to do something. So up she got, and quiet as a mouse, quiet as only a little girl can be, she snuck out of her room, and she went soft, quietly down the spiral staircase and out over the moat and down the garden. And though she felt scared when she was in the house, when her feet touched the embrace of the soft earth, her fear did not seem so strong, and she continued to follow the light in her heart into the darkness. She went to the end of the garden and she heard the cry again, and she climbed over the wall at the end of the garden, and there she was, in the darkness of the forest. She moved between the trees and heard the call once more, and came to a small clearing where the trees separated a little bit, and the shaft of moonlight was coming down. And there in the clearing was a nightingale, laying there with damaged wing. And circling around the nightingale was a snake. The snake scared the girl greatly then, and she was terrified. But as I say, love does strange things to our hearts sometimes, and so with a big breath in, she dove for the nightingale. And in a flash, the snake disappeared. And the little girl caught the nightingale in her hands. And the nightingale began to rise up, and it shimmered silver in the moonlight, glowing from within, shining from without. And the little girl felt a warmth go through her, and she felt a courage grow inside of her. And then the nightingale was gone. It was diving in and out of the trees, and with it that feeling of courage and warmth left the little girl, and so she flew after it. And so she was going down through the forest, wending each which way, diving, just about to catch up with the nightingale when... And the girl and the bird came out together, and they were out of the thickness of the forest and into a clearing. And in the clearing was a pond, and it sat right under the full moon's glow. And the two sisters of the night were speaking to each other in tongues known only to them. And the nightingale shot out and rose up and dove into the pond and disappeared without making a ripple. The little girl all of a sudden began to feel rather tired, and so she moved around the pond to where there was a great tall willow tree, and she lay down on one of its roots and tucked herself up and fell asleep. And when she awoke, it was not like the night to which she had fallen asleep, but it was day, but it was different. Everything was a bit brighter. The colours of the flowers were shining a bit more strongly, and the heat of the sun was glowing a bit more warmly. Everything was resonating with a bit more love. And there was a humming. And it seemed to be coming from the trees. So the little girl moved over to the tree, and she put her ear to this humming. And she began to make out voices. And she could hear one old, serious, stern voice talking to another, the softest, gentle, most lovely voice the girl had ever heard. And the serious voice was saying, "Well, you see, back then, my beloved Earth, things were not as they are now. You see, back then, all of feelings, children, all of joy, all of hurt, sadness, anger, fear, pain, rage, you know the lot. Well, they were all still inside their mother's womb, and they played together, and they just went around and around. And they had no purpose. They just were. And so I separated them. I sent them to you, my beloved Earth, so that they may make a task of life, that they may become. But now I fear I must be getting on, till we meet again, my beloved Earth." And then a soft, silvery voice came back as a reply. "Until the next moment, my beloved time." With that, the little girl pulled her ear from the tree, and the humming had stopped. And she must have felt a little dozy again, for she lay her head down, and again she fell asleep. When she awoke, it was to the very night that she'd fallen asleep. And the full moon was still out in the sky, and as she looked around, the reality of the situation began to hit her, and she began to feel rather scared. She saw how dark it was, and how sinister the trees were, and how their long fingers came down, the branches like warlocks' fingers, and how twigs cracking beneath her feet sent shivers through her spine, and how lost she was. She didn't know how she'd got here. She didn't know which way the castle was. So feeling altogether rather scared, she began to walk. And as she did, she began to recall the dream that she'd had. And those two voices that were speaking, and anger rose up inside of her. She thought, those poor feelings, why do they have to be separated? And why do they have to grow up? She who was experiencing a similar fate at the time felt particular remorse about this one. But as this feeling rose in, surprise suddenly raged in her being, as she saw that sadness had been there where before joy had been, and then anger had raged on through, and then surprise, the great trumpet bearer of understanding, burst on through. And as this happened, a realization dawned upon her, and she saw that the feelings, they had not been separated at all. And as this revelation came tumbling down, a wind blew through the trees, and borne upon it was that same soft, silvery voice. And it whispered in the girl's ear, and it said, oh no, do not fear, my dear, my child. None were separated, only sent to my garden to play as before, only on a bigger scale. And do not fear old Father Time, my dear. He is really the greatest joker of them all. With that, the wind blew off, and a warm, enshrouding blanket covered her, and she moved through the forest, and she knew which way to go, and soon enough the castle appeared, and she went over the garden wall and down the soft green grass of the garden and up the spiral staircase, and tucked herself into her bed. And as she did, the sun began to rise through her window. It crept up over her toes and over her legs and up over her body. And she always said that that was the first time that she ever truly felt the light of the sun, for you cannot know the light without going through the deepest night. And from that day forward, the little girl was never scared again.